Hey, Saretsky here. As always, Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you get sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask you a thumbs up and subscribe. Questions, comments, put those below. I want to do basically a recap video on the federal government's budget announcement, really just covering their housing policies. Because I think it's one thing to sort of as an outsider to read the media headlines, and then another thing to actually, understand the industry in depth, be working in it day to day, and then be able to ask really the smartest people in that industry, how they view these policies and what it's going to mean. So being able to unpack these things is really ultimately what I want to do here. Obviously being asked to do a lot of media interviews, but I really prefer just to do the interview right here in front of this, great audience that we built over the last 6 or 7 years on the Saretsky show. So, let's dive into it first and foremost, which was making all the headlines, which was, the foreign buyer ban. Oh, Canadian government proposes 2-year ban on foreign ownership. Of course, as anyone is well aware with this government here, is that these things are always littered with loopholes, like Swiss cheese, basically. So basically, the first and foremost thing is every media company picked it up and made this huge headline, and everyone's like, wow, can't believe they actually went ahead and did it. But you actually read a 300-page document and you go down to the section on the foreign buyer ban. This is exactly what it says. It says, to make sure that housing is owned by Canadians instead of foreign investors, Budget 2022 announces the government's intention to propose restrictions that would prohibit foreign commercial enterprises and people who are not Canadian citizens or permanent residents from acquiring non-recreational residential property in Canada for a period of 2 years. So they've proposed to bring something in. They have announced their intention to propose restrictions. So there's no actual timeline. If you go through all of the housing policy that they release, a lot of the housing policy actually has specific timelines. There is no timeline on a foreign buyer ban. It could be a year, it could be 3 years, it could be never. This is really just again, this is all housing, all governments, always political, always politics involved. If you dive into it a little bit deeper, at least what they're proposing is that, if you're a permanent resident, or you're a student on a work visa, or you're applying for permanent residency status, or if you're a foreign owner and you're buying a primary residence, these are all exemptions. So even if this tax actually went through, which it seems like there's a high probability that it still might not go through, it's still littered with all these loopholes. What they're basically trying to say is you can't buy investment properties if your passport says X. But again, this thing is just littered with loopholes. Again, even if it was brought in, I'm just trying to explain to people, it's okay, if you think about it in BC and Ontario, the two most expensive provinces in the nation, in BC here and in Ontario, we got 20% foreign buyers taxes. Last time I checked, they haven't made housing more affordable. Last time I looked, the average price of a single family home, the average price of a home, not even a single family home, the average price in BC is now just north of 1.1 million, all-time record highs, record price inflation over the last 2 years. The foreign buyer tax, just the way that it's designed, and obviously the way that this policy would probably be designed by the federal government, is not designed to actually create more affordable housing. And so if we look at the BC government's own official statistics, these aren't mine, I'm not making these up. This is the BC government. So if you go on their website, and you say, okay, show me the 2021 property transfer tax data. This is as official as it gets. It's registered at Land Titles Office. Foreign buyers as a percentage of residential transactions in 2021 accounted for just over 1% of all transactions in 2021. So it really is a nothing burger. Again, it made great headlines. But it's not even, doesn't even have a date. It's just a proposal, number one, and number two, it has shown to be ineffective, at least by a tax measure. So that's kind of my initial thoughts on that. If you look at a policy that does at least have a start date, which is a start, January of 2023, the federal government will announce that flipping homes, if you bought a home and resold it within 12 months, would be subject to a different level of taxation. Now, again, let me unpack this for you a little bit further. People that are flipping homes, the ones that you and I think about, hey, you know, they bought this old crappy house, they fixed it up and they renovated it. These are typically like anyone that's actually doing it, that is like doing it at sort of scale or doing it at least properly, like running it like a proper business, is running these property flips through a business, i.e. they're run through a corporation, which means they are subject to income tax, right? Like I've done it. I've flipped properties. Like you run them through a corporation. That's the proper tax and legal way to do it. Like you declare that you are running this as a business and you pay business taxes and income. So so if you make $100,000, it's taxed at your effective marginal tax rate for that business, right? So you become like, so if you're a small business that, you know, $500,000 a year, I mean, it's a very, very low tax rate. So quite efficient. What this will actually do is basically target like your mom and pops that are doing like these one-off flips. They will be subject to that. But again, like you have to understand like the tax code. If you are doing more than 1 or 2 flips and like now you're on like your 3rd flip in 5 years, like CRA is already going to flag you. CRA will already say, listen, you have a track record of flipping. You are not paying capital gains anymore. We are charging you as business income. So this was already, all they did basically was make a clarification on how they would basically tax flips moving forward. It was just a clarification that like, listen, you can't play in the gray of like capital gains anymore. You will be subject to full income. And then they basically said like, okay, there's exemptions now. Like if you went through a divorce, if you had a kid and you gotta upsize, like that you're not actually subject to that. So you'd still get the full primary residence 12-month exemption. So again, the devil is really in the details here. It makes a great headline like ban no more property flipping for 12 months. But when you actually deep dive into like the lingo, you're like, oh, well, this actually didn't really change anything at all. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at this policy change. What it actually does is like, I mean, I've had clients in the past, 12 months, for example, that bought a home about a year ago, looked at the market and says, I can sell my house for, tax-free primary residence for $500,000. I did nothing. I just lived here. I was never planning to flip it. I bought a home. I can make $500,000 in 12 months. I think I'm going to go and sell and rent and take $500,000 off the table. Like, I am not convinced that person's making the market worse for anybody else. I mean, if anything, they added to the supply at a time when supply was very low, so they then thus got paid a premium. Like if they had opted or were not able to list, then you would have had just even lower inventory. So again, I mean, if you look at official data, this is an extremely hot market in Greater Vancouver. The number of properties, the percentage of properties bought and resold within a 12-month period in Greater Vancouver accounts for 2% of total transactions as of most recent data as of February. 2% of total transactions. That's incredibly low. Now, if we start stripping out and saying, well, how many of them were like divorcees, people having kids, all the people that qualify for those exemptions, again, doesn't really have any teeth. If we kind of move forward here, you've got $4 billion dedicated to municipalities to help them speed up new development and construction. But again, like how is that $4 billion going to be allocated? My understanding, talking with the industry, is that it's going to be largely allocated to the problem cities, which is Vancouver, Toronto, Kelowna actually is on the government's radar. And so, but it's like, what are you going to do? You're going to take a project that normally would take 3 years to get approved, and you're going to get it down to like, maybe in a best case scenario, maybe you're going to get it down to 2.5. But like, then what? The problem is like, we're already building at, I would argue, supply constraints. You have a shortage of skilled labor that can actually build product. Like, talk to any developer. They're having troubles hiring enough people to actually get construction built and built on time. And so I'm not convinced that throwing $4 billion at it really is there's a supply problem in the pipeline too. You just don't have enough skilled people to actually build and people to actually process this. So, I mean, we're moving in the right steps. So we got to at least try something. But to say this is like the silver bullet is not it. And then you've got the Home Buyers Savers Program for first-time home buyers. You're allowed to save $40,000, a maximum of $40,000, I should say. So this basically replaces like the RRSP program, which as of right now, any first-time home buyer can basically tap into $35,000 of their RRSP to use it towards their down payment on their home, and they have to repay it within like 20 years or something. I don't even know the details because there's hardly few people that do it, but you're only allowed to save $8,000 a year, up to a maximum of $40,000. Again, I'm like, well, like, what is this going to do? I mean, if home prices are rising at like, 10% a year, or even like 5% a year, like, I just don't think saving $8,000 a year is going to move the needle. So again, all these programs sound really, really good at the surface level, but when you actually unpack them, you're like, this is going to do almost nothing. We're just beating around the bush here, dabbling on the fringes, making all these fringe policies to basically have politicians reelected to make it look like they're doing something. And I'm going to say it again, and we talked about it in the last couple of weeks' videos. The only thing that matters is, I mean, at the end of the day, I think is mortgage rates. I mean, look what's happening. We got the 5-year bond moving higher once again, now north of 2.6%. The typical home in Canada over the past several months the typical mortgage payment now has increased by about $700, going from mortgage rates of about 2.8 to now we're going up to 4.2%. We're going to get to 4.5%. That's what's going to drive home prices lower. Is it going to make housing more affordable? I mean, prices are going to have to drop enough to offset those higher mortgage rates. So again, I'm really struggling to see where affordability is going to meaningfully improve. And like we talk about this, like this government program of, okay, let's give municipalities $4 billion to fast track more housing supply. But at the same time, we're going to ramp up immigration targets. Those two policies contradict each other. They don't go hand in hand. You're asking the municipality to speed up, but at the same time, you're adding and raising your projections for immigration levels. They don't go hand in hand. And so this is the government, again, contradicting itself. Nobody ever talks about it. And just to point out here in BC last year had a record 101,000 new migrants in 2021. 101,000 new net migrants in 2021. That was the highest pace in 60 years. So basically you also had 34,000 people moving into BC from another province, which was the highest inflows of any other province. So a 60-year high in net migration into BC. To be honest, I'm actually surprised that more and more people continue to flow into BC, given that the average home price is 1.1 and climbing. So far, that hasn't deterred people. I think it is. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a lot of migration into places like, Alberta, Calgary, which we've talked about. But that's really the crux of it. So the net of all of this housing policies proposed by the federal government is really more or less a nothing burger. I think a lot of it's going to look good politically. It will sell. It will get votes. It makes them look like they're doing something. But none of these policies, when you actually unpack them, have a whole lot of teeth. And again, a foreign buyer ban with no date, just a proposal to basically bring it in, but don't get me started. So hope that video helped. We did a deep dive analysis. As always, we'll see you every Saturday.